Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Victor asks Claire for forgiveness and lets Kyle have a romantic relationship. Indicates that more problems is on the horizon, even though Victor Newman will seek Claire Newman for forgiveness and decide to permit her to have a romantic relationship with Kyle Abbott. Devon Winters will learn all Claire said about Audra Charles and the scheme to ruin her relationship with Kyle when he runs across Nate Hastings in the park. Devon will accept Victor's order and learn about the kiss that was observed between Kyle and Claire at society. Given that everyone is pointing fingers in different places, Nate will struggle to decide who to believe. Devon will essentially encourage Nate to follow his instincts since he believes Audra to be the least reliable member of the group. Nate will appear scared of the conclusion his intuition will take him to since he will have misgivings about Audra. On Thursday's Y&R episode, Victor will appear thoughtful at the ranch as he recalls uncomfortable times spent with Kyle and Claire. Victor would say that it's about Claire and Kyle before leaving to resolve this when Nikki Newman asks him what's wrong. Claire will tell Victoria Newman what transpired after she told Nate the truth about Audra's behavior at the Tack House. Claire will go on a tirade about Audra's deceit and attempt to blame Kyle for everything. Victoria will leave them to talk privately when Victor ultimately arrives and requests to speak with Claire alone. Victor has made his position on Kyle very obvious, so Claire won't see what they have to discuss. This time, though, things will be different. Victor will reassure Claire that his intention has always been to keep her safe, but he will also pledge that he will no longer obstruct her relationship with Kyle. Victor will persuade Claire that he is genuinely backing off, even asking for forgiveness as they embrace, despite her initial skepticism. Kyle will confess to Diane Jenkins Abbott and Jack Abbott at society that he gave Audra one kiss as part of his nice trap. Jack and Diane will believe that telling Claire now is preferable to running the chance of a confrontation later. Kyle will be concerned about how it would appear if Claire discovered that he had been hiding the kiss and will not inflict any more suffering on her. Kyle will not be anticipating that meeting because Victor will ultimately call him and invite him to the property. Since everything has changed, Claire will encourage Kyle to leave as soon as she arrives. Victor's change of heart over her romance with Kyle will make Claire very happy, so she will tell Jack, Diane, Victoria, and Nikki about it as well. Victor will insist that Kyle passed his test when he gets to the property. Although he will continue to observe Kyle, Victor will reassure him that he will not attempt to stop his relationship with Claire. Audra will inform Sally Spectre at Crimson Lights about that witch, Claire, telling Nate everything about Victor's scheme and the kiss she gave Kyle. Sally will give Claire some tough love and point out that there was a danger involved in entering into that arrangement with Victor, but Audra will act like Claire is a drama queen who is being nasty. Kyle was just a towel away from betraying Claire on the bed in Nice, but Audra still disapproves of him playing the victim. Even though Audra tried to repair the damage and blamed Kyle for everything, Nate continued to sleep on the couch. Nate won't allow Audra to sidestep this conversation or give him more lies since he will finally arrive and meet with her alone. According to teasers for The Young and the Restless, Nate will be prepared for the truth because he will know that Audra is lying to him. Watch to see how she reacts. Victor Newman pacing at the ranch was not unusual, but on this particular Thursday, his demeanor was different, thoughtful, burdened, yet resolute, as he replayed in his mind the tangled web of lies, betrayals, and desperate acts that had brought his granddaughter Claire Newman to this precarious point. Victor's lifelong instinct had always been control of his empire, control of his family, control of his enemies, but the realization had struck him with a force he could no longer ignore. Sometimes control only destroyed the very thing he was trying to protect. He had been dead set against Claire being romantically linked to Kyle Abbott, dismissing him as another privileged Abbott boy incapable of offering her the stability and loyalty she deserved. But now, as he stood by the window staring out at the horses grazing in the distance, Victor admitted to himself that forbidding the relationship had only deepened the chaos. Nikki, watching him with sharp intuition, asked what was wrong, and for once, Victor confessed without games. It was about Claire and Kyle. Before Nikki could press further, Victor left to resolve matters directly, determined to do something rare in his world, ask for forgiveness. Meanwhile, across town at society, Kyle Abbott was sitting with his parents, Jack Abbott and Diane Jenkins Abbott, trying to untangle the knot of truth and deception around his own role in the mess with Audra Charles. He confessed, with the guilt evident in his voice, that he had kissed Audra once in Nice, under the guise of playing along with her manipulative games, but it hadn't gone further. Jack, ever the cautious father who had seen countless schemes explode, urged him to be honest with Claire sooner rather than later. Diane, who had lived long enough on the receiving end of secrets blowing up spectacularly, agreed. Both believed the risk of Claire finding out elsewhere was far greater than the sting of hearing it from Kyle directly. Kyle nodded, torn between shame and determination, promising himself that he would not inflict more suffering on Claire than she had already endured in her short but turbulent life. What he didn't expect was the phone call that soon followed, Victor Newman himself inviting Kyle to the ranch. The tone of Victor's voice carried no hint of anger, but rather a solemn weight that made Kyle's heart pound in both fear and hope. Something had shifted. At the Tack House, Claire confided in her mother, Victoria Newman, after finally telling Nate Hastings the truth about Audra's deceit. Claire's tirade about Audra was raw, angry, and bitter, her voice trembling as she accused Audra not only of manipulating Kyle but also of attempting to turn the blame on her. Victoria listened, torn between her maternal instinct to protect her daughter and her realistic understanding that Newman entanglements were never simple. When Victor arrived and asked to speak with Claire alone, Victoria hesitated, but ultimately left them to it. Claire braced herself, convinced her grandfather was coming once again to impose his will, but what happened next stunned her. Victor softened, telling her that his every action had been rooted in a desire to keep her safe, even if his methods had been harsh. He admitted that perhaps he had been wrong to interfere in matters of her heart. For the first time, he asked for her forgiveness, pledging to step back and let her relationship with Kyle unfold naturally, with his blessing. Claire, skeptical at first, stared into Victor's eyes searching for the steel trap she was so used to, but instead found sincerity. When he embraced her, she allowed herself to believe, just for a moment, that her grandfather truly trusted her to make her own choices. The emotional release left her in tears, and she eagerly shared the news with Victoria, Nikki, Jack, and Diane, overjoyed that Victor's change of heart meant she could pursue happiness with Kyle without the Newman shadow pressing down on her. Yet, if Victor believed peace had arrived, he underestimated the storm brewing outside. At Crimson Lights, Audra Charles fumed, her fury spilling out in conversation with Sally Spectra. She seethed about Claire, calling her a witch for telling Nate everything about Victor's manipulative scheme and about the kiss she had shared with Kyle. Sally, who had danced with Victor's power herself, cautioned Audra, reminding her that deals with Victor always came with dangers, but Audra brushed it off, mocking Claire as melodramatic and vindictive. Still, beneath Audra's bravado, there was a simmering desperation. Her carefully constructed lies were unraveling, her relationship with Nate was crumbling, and Kyle was slipping further out of her grasp. The cracks in her mask were beginning to show. Nate, meanwhile, had been wrestling with the weight of what Claire had revealed. Running into Devon Winters at the park only amplified his turmoil. Devon, weary of Audra's slippery ways and still holding grudges of his own, urged Nate to trust his instincts, bluntly calling Audra the least reliable person in their circle. Nate knew Devon was right, but admitting that meant facing the ugly truth, that Audra had lied to him, again and again. When he returned to the apartment, he refused to let her sidestep with charm or manipulation. He forced the confrontation, demanding the truth without room for excuses. Audra, cornered, tried once more to twist the blame onto Kyle, insisting that he was the true manipulator, but Nate wasn't buying it anymore. His patience had run out, and with a steely calmness, he warned her that the days of lies and cover-ups were finished. Back at the ranch, Victor welcomed Kyle, who arrived anxious and braced for battle. Instead, Victor surprised him by declaring that Kyle had passed his test, that despite everything, he believed Kyle's intentions toward Claire were sincere. Victor warned that he would still be watching, but assured Kyle he would not stand in the way of their relationship. For Kyle, the relief was immense, though it was tempered by the gnawing guilt of his secret kiss with Audra. He knew he had to tell Claire before someone else did, and with Victor now on their side, there was even more at stake. Claire, radiant with happiness after Victor's blessing, encouraged Kyle to join her immediately so they could finally move forward without barriers. Their reunion was heartfelt, filled with hope, but the shadow of Kyle's secret loomed large. The ripple effects of Victor's decision spread quickly. Nikki, though supportive, remained wary of Kyle's Abbott ties, reminding Victor that the Abbott-Newman rivalry was never far from the surface. Jack and Diane, cautiously optimistic, knew that any truce involving Victor was fragile at best. And Victoria, though relieved for her daughter, sensed that Audra would not go quietly. The pieces were shifting, alliances were changing, and in true Genoa City fashion, peace was only temporary. Audra, isolated and increasingly desperate, began plotting her next move, determined not to let Claire and Kyle's romance flourish without a fight. Nate's rejection stung, Devon's distrust cornered her, and Victor's forgiveness of Claire left her with fewer allies than ever. But Audra Charles had never been one to back down, and as she stewed at Crimson Lights, she vowed to find a way to reclaim power, even if it meant dragging Kyle, Claire, and everyone else into another round of chaos. And so, while Victor Newman believed he had taken a step toward healing his fractured family by asking Claire for forgiveness and permitting her relationship with Kyle, he had in fact set in motion a new storm. For in Genoa City, forgiveness rarely lasts, love is never safe, and every truth exposed only leads to another secret waiting in the shadows. The war for trust, loyalty, and survival was far from over, and the next act promised to be even more explosive. The fragile calm that Victor Newman thought he had restored with his olive branch to Claire did not last long. Genoa City had always thrived on tension, and this moment was no different. Peace was only a temporary illusion, a surface calm above treacherous waters. Claire, still glowing from the emotional reconciliation with her grandfather, poured her joy into conversations with Nikki, Victoria, Jack, and Diane, relaying every word Victor had spoken and basking in the rare moment where the patriarch had admitted fault and asked for forgiveness. Yet, in the back of everyone's minds, there was a nagging unease. They all knew Victor too well. Even when he claimed to be stepping aside, the great chess player of Genoa City never put away the board completely. Kyle tried to mirror Claire's optimism, but inside, guilt gnawed at him like a relentless parasite. The kiss with Audra haunted him. It was only a kiss, he reminded himself. It had meant nothing, an act to keep Audra's suspicions at bay and nice. But every time he looked into Claire's trusting eyes, every time she smiled with relief that her family was finally on her side, the lie weighed heavier. Diane, who had pressed him earlier to confess before things spiraled, repeated her advice. Better she hears it from you, Kyle, than from Audra. Jack, too, reminded him that one secret was enough to destroy what he was trying to build. Kyle promised them both he would tell her, but as often happened in Genoa City, timing was everything, and timing was rarely kind. At Crimson Lights, Audra Charles brewed like a storm cloud, her bitterness sharper with each passing hour. Sally Spectra's pragmatic advice, that aligning with Victor had been a dangerous gamble from the start, rolled off Audra like water on glass. She didn't want to hear caution, she wanted revenge. She couldn't stand that Claire had turned the tables, that Nate had turned away from her lies, that Victor had seemingly absolved Claire. In Audra's mind, none of this was fair. She was the one who had put everything on the line, maneuvered, risked, and schemed, only to be painted as the villain. Fury coursed through her veins, and she muttered to Sally that if Claire thought she had won, she was about to be very mistaken. Sally, ever the realist, warned her not to go nuclear, but Audra smirked with venom. She was already formulating her counterstrike, and Kyle's little secret kiss was the weapon she planned to use. Meanwhile, Nate Hastings found himself unable to sit with the dissonance of everything he had learned. Devon's words echoed in his mind. Audra was not trustworthy, and his instincts had been screaming the same thing for weeks. He replayed every moment, every carefully crafted excuse Audra had given, every way she had twisted things back on him, and he realized just how much of himself he had surrendered to her games. The realization stung his pride as much as his heart. Confronting her again, he demanded that she stop with the deflections. This time, Nate's voice carried a finality that even Audra could not ignore. When she attempted to play her usual card, tears and accusations aimed at Kyle, Nate didn't flinch. "It's over, Audra," he said flatly, a sentence that hit her like a slap. The panic in her eyes flashed only for a second before she steadied herself, masking the devastation with icy resolve. She wasn't going to lose without drawing blood first. Across town, Claire and Kyle met at the Abbott mansion, where Claire excitedly filled Kyle in on Victor's new stance. She was practically glowing as she recounted how her grandfather had finally stepped back, and how she now believed they could move forward together without interference. Kyle smiled, touched by her happiness, but the heaviness in his chest made it hard to breathe. The words, "I need to tell you something about Audra," hovered on his tongue, but before he could get them out, Claire kissed him, silencing his confession in a swell of passion and relief. The timing, again, had betrayed him. He told himself he would wait for the right moment, but in Genoa City, the right moment was usually the one you never took. At Newman Enterprises, Victor was in his office, sipping a glass of whiskey as he mulled over everything. Though he had asked Claire for forgiveness and claimed to back off, part of him still didn't fully trust Kyle. It wasn't in Victor's DNA to leave something so important to chance. He had tested Kyle once, and though Kyle had technically passed, Victor decided to quietly keep the young abbot under observation. To Victor, granting permission didn't mean abdicating control, it meant shifting to a subtler form of influence. Nikki, when she learned of this, shook her head in exasperation. "You promised her, Victor. If she finds out you're still pulling strings, you'll destroy the trust you just rebuilt." But Victor only gave his usual cryptic smile, muttering about how one always had to be 2 steps ahead in a world full of snakes. The snakes, of course, were busy striking. Audra made her way to Diane and Jack at society, feigning contrition. She spun a story about regretting her actions, about wanting to clear the air, but her true goal was to plant the seed of Kyle's betrayal where it would grow fastest. With carefully chosen words, she let slip that she and Kyle had shared a kiss in Nice. She framed it as part of Kyle's game to trap her, insisting it had been his idea to cross the line. Diane's eyes widened, and though she already knew from Kyle, she kept her expression guarded, unwilling to give Audra the satisfaction of a reaction. Jack, however, was less adept at concealing his anger. His voice rose as he told Audra to stay out of their lives. But Audra, smirking, reminded them that secrets always came out, and when Claire found out that Kyle hadn't been honest with her, the fallout would be theirs to deal with. Word traveled fast, as it always did, and soon Audra made sure whispers of that kiss reached the ears of others, Chelsea at Crimson Lights, Phyllis in passing conversation, and eventually even Sally, who warned her once again she was playing with fire. But this time, Audra didn't care about fire, she wanted to burn everything down. Kyle, sensing the walls closing in, finally resolved to tell Claire before she could hear it from anyone else. At the Abbott house, he took her hand, his eyes full of conflict, and confessed that while in Nice, he had kissed Audra. Claire's face fell, the joy she had been carrying evaporating into shock and pain. Kyle rushed to explain. It had been meaningless, part of the ploy, never something he wanted, but the hurt in Claire's eyes cut deep. "You should have told me the moment it happened," she whispered, her voice trembling. Kyle reached for her, begging for forgiveness, but Claire pulled back, her walls rising as quickly as they had fallen with Victor. She wasn't just upset about the kiss, she was devastated that Kyle had hidden it, even after everything they had promised each other. When word of Claire's devastation reached Victor, his reaction was swift and brutal. Though he had vowed to step back, the sight of his granddaughter hurt reignited his fury. He summoned Kyle to the ranch once again, this time not with an olive branch but with a stern warning. "You had one chance to prove yourself, boy, and you blew it." Kyle, desperate, tried to explain, but Victor's rage drowned him out. Claire, however, intervened, her voice breaking as she insisted she didn't want her grandfather dictating her heart again. The room was thick with tension, Victor's protectiveness colliding with Claire's yearning for independence. Nikki stepped in to de-escalate, reminding Victor that forgiveness was what he had preached. Reluctantly, Victor relented, but his glare at Kyle promised that his trust, once broken, would not be easily rebuilt. Elsewhere, Nate confronted Devon, admitting that everything Claire had revealed had been true and that Audra had manipulated him far longer than he wanted to admit. Devon, satisfied to see his instincts vindicated, nevertheless warned Nate that the fallout wasn't over. Audra was dangerous when cornered, and she had nothing left to lose. Nate nodded grimly, aware that the storm was only growing. Audra, meanwhile, doubled down. Meeting with Tucker McCall in a shadowy corner of the GCAC, she hinted at a new alliance. Tucker, ever the opportunist, perked up at the mention of destabilizing Newman and Abbott relationships. If Claire and Kyle's romance is the golden child of both families, then imagine the chaos when it crumbles, Audra purred. Tucker smirked, intrigued. It wasn't long before the two began whispering about strategies to exploit the fracture lines now spreading between Victor, Claire, and Kyle. The saga of forgiveness had, in typical Genoa City fashion, transformed into yet another test. Victor's gesture of reconciliation was now mired in doubt, Claire's newfound happiness poisoned by betrayal, Kyle's honesty too little too late, and Audra's hunger for revenge finding fertile ground in dangerous alliances. The question was no longer whether Victor truly forgave, or whether Claire and Kyle's love could withstand outside forces. It was whether the storm Audra unleashed would tear both the Newmans and the Abbotts apart once more. And in Genoa City, storms never passed quietly. They broke families, shattered alliances, and set the stage for new wars. This one was only beginning. Tucker McCall leaned back in his chair at the GCAC lounge, his trademark smirk curling as Audra outlined her idea. She spoke with icy precision, every word sharpened like a blade, determined to turn Kyle and Claire's budding romance into a weapon. Tucker, always one to appreciate a finely tuned scheme, nodded along, amused at the fire in her tone. You want to tear down both the Newmans and the Abbotts in one strike, Tucker mused, tapping the rim of his glass. Ambitious, Audra. I like it. But dangerous. Audra's eyes gleamed. Dangerous is the only game worth playing. She explained that Victor's forgiveness wasn't genuine, that he would still be watching Kyle like a hawk. If they played it right, they could set traps to make Kyle look untrustworthy, feeding Victor's suspicions until he couldn't help but pull Claire away for good.